Welcome to the eCommerce Profits Podcast, where we feature top founders and experts in the e-commerce industry and take an in-depth look at the struggles and successes in growing e-commerce brands profitably.
All right, Josh Chin here. I'm the host of the eCommerce Profits Podcast, where we feature top experts in the e-com industry, and we go behind the scenes of the struggles and successes in growing a brand. Now, this episode is brought to you by Chronos.agency. If you run a direct-to-consumer e-commerce brand that is ready to scale and double your customer lifetime value through lifecycle marketing, Chronos is your company. We've helped hundreds of brands scale profits with email, SMS, and mobile push marketing while getting an average of 3,500% ROI from our efforts. We've worked with brands like Truly Beauty, The Udi, Elias Skin, and many more. The next step is to email us at sales@chronos.agency, or you can go to chronos.agency to learn more. Today's guest is Mark Miano, the Executive VP of Sales of Glew.io. He's one of the first employees at Glew, and today he heads up revenue for the company. Glew is a business intelligence solution built for e-commerce. They help e-commerce businesses find powerful insights to grow profits, revenue, and optimize operations, all through hyper-intuitive reporting. Now, Mark is also an avid skier. He spends about 20 or 30 days a year outside of his hometown of North Carolina to ski. Mark, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Josh. I'm happy to be here.
Let's dive straight into it. So tell me, for the average layperson, in the simplest of terms, what does Glew actually do?
That's a really great question. And a very actually kind of a tough one to answer in layman's terms, since data warehousing and transforming data and all these technical terms are usually really destroy a average person's confidence in being able to operate in the arena. But it actually isn't that tough. What we are is a reporting system. Okay, so you probably have heard of the phrase data warehouse, in everyone's careers listening to your podcast. But essentially, what we do is we move data into one place, and we apply logic to that data to allow you to truly understand the reality of your business. So let me give you a hardcore example. Think of profitability. I mean, that's what we're all here to maximize. And I promise you that your listeners cannot measure it, at least not measure it easily, right? There's many currencies floating around the world. Different platforms have a different definition of quote unquote revenue, including discounts, including shipping, including taxes, things of that nature.
Yeah.
So just being able to provide you a single source of truth of what is or isn't profitable is tough enough. But that is what we do, is we take all that data that you're sitting on in all of these disparate environments and automatically allow you to understand how to move the needle in the direction of profitability for yourself in a way that you weren't able to do before.
Mark, I just want to latch onto that. You mentioned single source of truth. I love that. And at Chronos, that's what we struggle to do as well as an agency. And having a single source of truth, tell me a little bit about why that's important and what does that mean to a business?
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk in the lens of an example. Okay, attribution. I think everyone has been in a situation where you've just spent, whether it's $5,000 or $100,000 in advertising spend. How is that advertising spend performing across all my different efforts? Well, you wake up in the morning, you have your cup of coffee, and you open up Facebook, and Facebook says they made you $100,000. And then you go into Klaviyo, and Klaviyo is great. They say they made you 50 grand. And then you go into Google Analytics, and they said they made you 50 grand. And then you look at your bank account, and you expect to see $200,000, and maybe there's half of that in there.
Yeah.
I mean, don't you wish you had 10 minutes of your life back? Because you just didn't learn anything, because each one of these different tabs that you have open are competing for your ad spend, right?
Yep.
So they are going to, which I think is okay for them to do, present themselves in as positive of a light as possible, i.e., using an attribution model, which makes their email or Facebook or Google platform look as good as possible to you to encourage you to spend more advertising dollars with them. But the result of that approach is you really don't have a single source of truth. In this case, you have three sources of truth. So what we do again is we are that single source of truth to objectively, in this case, grade each one of these different advertising efforts in a way that is logical, doesn't double count a dollar. You
Hmm.
can actually change what models you're using for what particular reasons there might be.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's accurate, dependable, and there's no what we call conflict of interest in the way of you in greater profits. The conflict of interest being Facebook wanting you to spend more advertised money with them, and
Yeah.
your interest being you wanting to be more profitable.
And just full disclosure, at Chronos, we are trialing and testing our glue on a couple of clients, and we're working on that at the moment as we speak. One of the things that I've noticed pretty much immediately is that um, Glue has done such a great job in hiding the mess and the work that needs to be done behind the scenes that doesn't necessarily add a ton of value to the end user. For example, ETL, like extract, transform, and load. I don't even understand what that means, but what I do know is that that's a core part of what makes reporting useful,
But
especially when you're merging different sources of data.
but
So
would you mind if I tried to give it a shot to kind of explain this to your
yeah,
audience?
for sure,
Okay.
educate me as well in the
Yeah.
process.
So, when there is going to, for everybody, there is going to be a time in your business where you need a single source of truth. It might be
Yep.
$1 million a year. It might be $500,000 a year. It might be $20 million. That's your judgment call. In my opinion, it's $0 a year. But hey,
Yeah.
I'm biased, right? I sell reporting and analytics for a living. So let's be real. Um, but what is the best kept secret in this space? It is what you said is called ETL, extract, transform, and load. And not to be picky, but for the technical people out there, we do the new version, which is ELT, extract,
Mhm.
load, and transform. Either way, the keyword is transforming data. Here's a couple of examples. Let's say I'm selling on Shopify and Amazon, and I have two values of revenue, right? I have revenue from Shopify, I have revenue from Amazon. You cannot sum those values together. One might include taxes, one might include shipping. One
Mm.
might be in pounds, one might be in dollars. So those two values need to be transformed into a singular structure first before we have the luxury of calculating your true profit. Another really simple example for your audience is time zone. Okay. Shopify is in London time zone, and its subscription partner Recharge, which I think just got evaluated for like $3 billion or something,
Yeah.
that's in Eastern time zone.
Hmm.
Well, that's a huge problem when you're trying to analyze your world when we have a 4 or 5 hour difference between when we're measuring the behavior of your customer.
Yeah.
I'm going to take it a step further. Where we really shine is by actually enriching these tables and fields further with data which aren't available out of APIs.
Mm.
So, for example, for the operations people out there trying to order the right amount of product to sell, right? We don't want to over order or under order product for obvious
Yep.
reasons. They use sell through rates.
Mm.
A sell through rate is a ratio. It's the amount sold in a time period divided by the amount on hand at the beginning of that time period. It's like the last t-shirt in the warehouse was basically the last t-shirt that was in demand by my customer. Basically what you're trying to measure.
Right.
Well, the top of that, the amount you sold in a time period, that lives in Shopify.
Hmm.
That denominator, the quantity you had available at the beginning of the time period, that doesn't live anywhere. It's the Glew system that is proactively archiving and holding the exact quantity available of every SKU every day for you. as a reference point so we can run that ratio. In fact, one of my very first clients was actually Amazon, whether you can believe it or not.
Mm,
It's called Blink for Home. It makes home automation equipment like cameras for your doorbell and you know um, security systems, stuff like that. Well, this guy had a real big pain point because he was ordering chips and all kinds of high end electronic equipment from China,
yeah.
and his lead time was constantly changing. It would maybe be 100 days to get a chip. It might bump up to 250 days. And
Mm,
that sell through rate ratio was so important and vital for him because if he over ordered or under ordered, one bad order would literally put him under.
yeah.
It was our system that was able to, in budget, provide him that ratio in whatever date range he needed as things changed and the world became more and more unpredictable, which allowed him to actually get acquired by Amazon. So hopefully that answers your question. And
Huge. Wow.
yeah,
That's huge. Now let's talk a little bit about post reporting. What are you look at a ton of accounts and you look at a ton of data over just 12 years that you've been in SaaS. Now, what are some of the first couple of KPIs or metrics that you would look at for a brand that just installed Glew, for example?
absolutely. So there's going to be I'll call it the three layers that you'll use at least in the first 100 days approaching your data. The first layer is profitability. I mean,
Hmm.
that's normally the goal is to maximize profitability, and it's normally not being measured. And when you're looking at your dashboards, well, we want to repeat what makes us most profitable and stop what is losing us money. So that will be the first thing. Now, I'm talking about profitability at a company level, at
Hmm.
a sales channel level, like POS, marketplaces, and D2C. I'm talking
Hmm.
at an ad channel level, at a campaign level, and at a customer level. Lifetime value minus customer acquisition costs. Right.
Yeah.
After we cover that, we're then going to flip into customer behavior. Uh, and that really is identifying, first of all, it starts around customer segmentation, but
Hmm.
it's very quickly identifying what characteristics do the best customers share. Uh, where do they live? What channels first convert them? What campaigns first convert them? What do they buy? Their average order value, that stuff. But we also want to understand what characteristics do the worst customers share. I think all of your audience members can relate that you don't have all the time in the world. So we have
Hmm.
to understand what to discontinue doing in order to replace it with what we want to repeat or augment day to day. After we have some sort of game plan wrapping our hands around the behavior of the customer, we're then going to move into operations. So every
Right.
company has a limited amount of physical capital, and the flow of that physical capital through the company needs to be managed very carefully. And
Hmm.
uh, and then usually from there, things start splintering off into more niche type of um, um, company specific KPIs like loyalty programs or
Yeah.
subscription data or stuff like that.
Mm, got it. I have a very specific question, and I guess a use case in this instance. Um, shout out to Rick Kostick from 100%pure.com. I've had him on the show, and one of the problems that we talked about that he was facing at his business uh, was around product life cycles and knowing when to end a product and announce its end of life, essentially. Now, they've been around for a long time. So they have a ton of SKUs and a ton of categories and a ton of different products, essentially. So what how can business intelligence in general help with a decision like that when on one hand you want to be moving on to more profitable products and shifting resource allocation to more useful means, and on the other hand you're having like loyal customers that have been with you for a long time, like years and years, buying that same product, relying upon that same product for a very long time, and if you discontinue that product it would create a ton of dissatisfaction and unhappiness and that very specific segment of people. How do you reconcile a
It's
problem like that?
it's such a cool question, and it actually folds directly into, I think, the one of the specifically for e-commerce data and e-commerce strategy. It's actually getting marketing and operations to a lot of times they're in conflict with each other,
Hmm.
and actually getting them to cooperate with each other. And let me give you an example of what I mean for Rick, right? How do I go about making that decision? Well, let's understand what the end goal is. The end goal is to attract and keep the best customers and to avoid and lose the worst customers. So
Hmm.
there's a couple of KPIs that we can use in order to make that judgment call. One of them is the lifetime value of the customers that buy a certain product. Okay.
Hmm.
If that number for this set of SKUs that you're talking about is strong and growing, then in my opinion, we should err on the side of keeping that product.
Mm.
The second KPI I think I would talk about is inventory velocity, which is the amount of SKUs for this specific SKU, the amount of units you sell per day.
Right.
Is that how is that trending? Is it going up? Is it constant? Is it falling super hard? That's a
Hmm.
great understanding of, my opinion, forecasting out if more customers are going to be coming that are looking for that product, or if it was a fad or a trend and we should sunset it. Now, in addition to, and I'll stop it there with the KPIs, but from a strategic side, what I would recommend to Rick is look, if let's say this thing is not profitable for you, or maybe you're not even making money on it to the point where you want to waste your time with it, don't be afraid to make it worth your while and ask your clients for what you want. Something like this: hey, customer, I know you really like this product, and I am thinking about discontinuing it. You're like the only person that's buying it. If you provide me 3 new customers in the next year, then I will keep the product.
Mm.
If you don't, then I'm going to have to discontinue it. Don't be afraid to ask your customers for something in return for the value that you're giving them, especially if that value is not profitable for you. Make it
Mm.
profitable.
Gotcha. I like how you think, and I tend to err towards the side of let the data guide our decisions. But a lot of the times, these decisions are tied with a lot of emotion as well. It can be as simple as discontinuing a product that has been means a lot to the founder or the team, to um, s- to deciding to stop servicing a certain segment of customers altogether. I think that there is I guess, a balance between emotions and acknowledging that there's a softer side to making decisions and the hard data and hard science behind making decisions. Where do you stand on this spectrum? And how do you kind of think about this?
The ultimate fallacy that you're talking about is something called a sunk cost. Nothing has put more businesses under than being emotionally attached to a sunk cost. And let me define that. A sunk cost is something that you've spent in the past that you'll never get back.
Hmm.
And then what ends up happening is, let's say Rick, let's not to pick on Rick, but let's say Bob
Yeah,
goes out and he has this really awesome cheetah patterned button down shirt. Okay. And
yeah.
this thing was all the rage 5 years ago. And he went ahead and spent $100,000 wholesale prices to get all these leopard printed shirts. That is a sunk cost. What the worst thing Bob can do is look at his data and see that no one wants to buy leopard printed button down shirts, but continually invest in promoting that product over Facebook or over Klaviyo or whatever, because he's emotionally attached to his decision that he made to buy those shirts and will do whatever he can to sell it, whether at a
Mm.
loss or not. What Bob should do every single day is look at his data and see, should I go ahead and just use these as rags? to clean my factory because no one wants them and I can pull more utility out of them as rags, not buy
Yeah.
more rags.
Yeah.
And it is that part where you need the data to help you pull yourself out of your emotional attachment to these decisions so that you can do what's best for you and your employees.
I love that. But I'm going to counter that again with another example.
Sure.
What if that, I guess that emotional dilemma or decision stems from the fact that I know if I piss off this tiny group of people who are may not necessarily be my most profitable customers, that could result in a ripple effect on my brand when they speak to their friends and families about my brand. How do you judge something like that? Can you quantify that, or how do you account for that in a decision like
You know,
this?
quantifying your customers' thoughts instead of actions, very hard to do, right?
Yeah.
Actions are easy. The order button, the amount of money they spent with you, the clicks, the visits to the site, those things are quantifiable because they are measured in quantity. The emotional side of it and the thoughts are qualitative. It's really hard to represent those in a number. Usually we're looking at words or explanations or conversations, right? You know, I have a I have a client very successful in the CPG space. Okay, and I got a chance to watch this guy speak at this conference called the IRCE, Internet Retailers Conference for your audience out in America.
Right.
And he was giving this really great presentation, and someone asked him, "Hey, how did you do such a good job of growing your business so quick? Any advice for an entrepreneur?" And he was like, "Well, you know, every week, that's not every week, every year, I spend a week of my time as the CEO identifying my best and worst customers and literally calling them up on the phone and asking them why they like me, why they don't, what I'm doing great, and what I can do to improve."
Wow.
And he, although it was a time suck of his day, that is what gave him the information that he needed in order to make really tough decisions which were emotionally charged.
Mm.
Now, that's one way of accruing that qualitative data.
Yeah.
But you might want to go out with surveys,
Hmm.
loyalty programs. You know, it does cost the customer more time in order to provide you that information, which means you need to make it worth your customers' while to get that information. But nonetheless, gathering that information is still needs to be driven by a data driven approach, even though it might be a little bit, although that data might not be in spreadsheets.
I love that, and that reminds me of something. And part of what we do at Chronos is to turn the um, seemingly unscalable to scalable. One-on-one interactions with customers and creating that relationship, creating that at scale with email, SMS, and push. So one of the things that we have experimented very recently is in post-purchase surveys through Typeform, and then crafting out a much more robust customer profile of their preferences, their needs, their wants, their what they dislike, what they like. Um, I'm interested in what that means for a platform like Glew when you have kind of warehousing capabilities across platforms from Klaviyo, from SMS Tool, and how do you aggregate data that is so, I guess, qualitative, or
Yeah.
is there a way to make that binary in a way that's meaningful?
So, in order to capture the data and then analyze it, decisions do have to be made in terms of the questions asked and how you're gathering it. But let me
Yep.
give you like a, a good example. So,
Sure.
one of my close partners is a Gorgeous, okay, on the like customer
Great too. Yeah.
relationship management side, and Zendesk is there too, and there's a bunch. Well, think about this. I am a customer service manager, answering tickets and trying to service the customers the best way I can. And I got a long queue of tickets. I got
Hmm.
1,000 tickets I got to get. but I'm also getting a score every single time a ticket is done.
Mm.
1 to 5 stars. 1 star is crappy, 5 stars is perfect.
Yeah.
Well, here's a rhetorical question, which I'll answer right now. What is the star rating that this customer service rep should be aiming for? 5 stars? 1 star? Remember, he's got 1,000 tickets to get through.
Mm.
Well, the way that you're going to approach this is correlating a lifetime value to a star rating.
Ah.
One of my clients found, he's in the men's clothing area, tailoring suits and jackets and stuff. Kind of a cool company. Um, that it was actually 3 stars. 3 stars,
3. Huh.
3 out of 5. 3 stars is where the lifetime value of the customer peaked. To get 4 or 5 stars actually hurt the business because they were wasting valuable time and not getting paid in return for it. He could actually serve more customers with fewer customer service managers if he settled just for 3 stars out of the 5.
Interesting.
How on earth would he have been able to find that out and maximize the use of his manpower or woman power and a certain client's employees' time if he didn't have the data to help him make that unemotional decision?
Mm. That's really interesting. That's a
Now,
really cool case study.
to tie it back to your question though, with the feedback afterwards, something like that, where maybe you have like, hey, like you would have to come up with some type of survey, right?
Mm.
And then you'd probably want to have a ranking of like, hey, what was the opening up the box experience like? What was the quality of the material when you opened it up feel like? Like, was your
Mm.
customer service experience great from 1 to 5? You would have to quantify it in some type of numerical fashion in order for us to easily provide you something insightful.
That makes sense. What are some of the more interesting um, use cases that you've seen being done from a BI perspective for e-commerce?
Oh man, yeah. So I think the funnest, one of the more fun parts of what I get to do is not just show you, share with you the data, but one of the unique things that working with here at Glew is we're a specialty system for one industry, e-commerce and multi-channel. Most analytics tools cannot claim that. Like Tableau and Looker, right? They serve everybody from hospital systems to weather channel, e-commerce. We do just.
Yeah.
What's so exciting about what we provide you is we don't just provide you like the visualization or the report, but I can provide you what that visualization or report should look like.
Mm.
What should your lifetime value to customer acquisition cost ratio be?
Mm.
Should your lifetime value look like as it's trending over time? What should your sell through rate be in specific time intervals? And
What is that? Is that a kind of like an aggregate of industry trends and industry averages, or is it an extrapolation of existing data?
it's it's both. So, a lot of these you don't need to do a ton of work. Well, first of all, let me just say Glue does not sell your data or use your data for any other purpose other than to hold it and maintain it for you, right? But at the same time, me and my team have been doing this for like 10 years. And I've seen the guts of like 6 or 6,500 Shopify accounts. So I can easily tell you if your lifetime value curve looks good or not just at a
Yeah.
glance. So extrapolating it, I mean, sure you could, but it would be totally unnecessary. Like we're talking very, very basic benchmarks, which
Yeah.
are still incredibly valuable for someone who's new to the whole, reporting game.
It's incredible. Mark, some personal questions for you. Skiing. Tell me about that. Why is that such an obsession? Taking 20, 30
Uh,
days out of the year, going out of state just to ski.
yeah, it's a great question. No one's ever asked me that before. I think at first it's nostalgia for me. My father and I'm very, very close to my parents. And the one thing I grew up in New Jersey. The one thing my
Mm.
dad and I always did either one-on-one or with my sister, is we went skiing as much as we could. So it brings back a lot of like warm memories on that front. The second part, I think, is just like the personal challenge. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love working in teams. Um, but I'm more of an individual um contributor when it comes to the sports area. Like I used to play basketball and that was cool, but like
Yeah.
to be able to get something super dangerous and accomplish it myself without any help, I think is pretty adrenaline rush and kind of scary.
Yeah.
And the third thing is probably the scenery. So I'm not a big golfer, uh, whether that's good or not. And really, the only way for me to see like some beautiful scenery if I'm not golfing is going to be through going going skiing. So,
Very cool. Do you see any parallels drawn to business? And I find that I learned a ton from just being out of work and business. I learned a ton from poker, for instance. Any principles that you apply to work from skiing?
yeah, I would say that I love risk. So if in business, I think we all can agree, especially for your clients who own their own businesses, you're not going to get that reward unless you take massive risk. And I have huge respect. I think that's why I get along with I've always worked for entrepreneurial companies. This is the second company I've worked for, and I'm usually the first person hired. With great risk comes great reward. You're not going to be able to look back up that slope and say I did that unless you had you know, the fortitude and the courage to
Yeah.
go ahead and do it. And no one's going to do that for you,
Mm,
right? Like when you own your own company, like you, Josh, like no one's like, if you get sick one day, no one's like, hey, Josh, you know what? Stay in, like, have some chicken soup. Like, I'll go ahead and run your business for you.
that'd be
That's not how
nice.
entrepreneurs work.
Yeah,
Um, so I hope that answers your question.
it's very cool. Risk. And this really interesting because I look at Glue and I think Glue as a risk management platform,
Hmm.
not necessarily something that allows for more risk taking necessarily, but I guess smarter risk taking and smarter risk management. What this reminds me of um the I forget the name of the My First Million podcast
Hmm.
with the Hustle, Sampar and Shan. They interviewed the CTO and co-founder of HubSpot, Dharmesh Shah, and Dharmesh mentioned that one of his, I guess, in a certain period of time, one of his biggest jobs in the company, his biggest objective is to maintain what he calls boldness in the culture of the company, and he defines boldness as taking risks. Are they taking enough risks in the company? Because they're a huge, massive public company, right? They IPO, they're worth like $25 billion in valuation. So it's easy to kind of come to a point where, all right, I'm comfortable. I'm not going to take any more risk. I'm just going to cruise along. And part of his job is to make sure that the people on his team are taking enough risk, which is
Hmm.
super interesting to think about. It just reminded me of that when you, uh,
And the right risk, right? It's like you have to cultivate a culture that encourages the lowest guy in the totem pole as well as the highest guy in the totem pole to offer the best ideas that they have
mhm,
without worry of getting an ego damaged, without reprimanding them because it might not be the best idea. It's probably one of the toughest things to do. And that's really, I'm not surprised why HubSpot is the juggernaut that it is with that type of culture for sure.
what are some brands or companies that you personally look up to?
Oh, that's a really great question. Um, Specifically in software or just like in general?
Software or DTC or anything else in general?
D2C software, anything else? I
Yeah.
think I'm so close to some of them in the D2C world. I think one of my favorite ones is this company called Native Deodorant.
Most, yeah.
Yeah, I think they have such an interesting story when it comes to just approaching a marketplace which was obviously crowded,
Yeah.
right? Deodorant. I mean, like it's been done for hundreds of years or whatever. and you just caught all of these huge companies on their heels and carved out a new way of doing things through the lens of an experience. And
Yeah.
I think that falls in line with my mantra of selling things, right? Like I've sold things, analytics for 10 or 12 years, but you can sell anything. And people buy things for three reasons. And I always remind even my clients this: they buy things for three reasons. It makes them money, it saves them money, or it makes them feel good. And that third one, it makes them feel good, will crush the other two every single time. And think about
Mm,
native. It doesn't make them money. It sure doesn't save them money, but
yeah.
just the experience of getting the deodorant, opening it up, reading what's in it, why it's better than the other Procter and Gamble deodorant ever, smelling it, you know, the feet, the whole experience is why people are willing to pay double for their deodorant, which I think should open up everyone's eyes to why people are actually buying from. The next time you want to offer a discount, instead of offering a discount, why don't you take the extra step to think critically about what you can do for your customer besides giving them your profits? There's so many other things that you can do to grow your business, I think, is why I like that native brand. So,
That's amazing. Mark, that's a great place to end our conversation. But if people are interested to connect with you or get to know Glue and test it out for themselves, where should they go to?
you can go to glew.io. That's our GLEW .io, or you can email me mark.mian as in Nancy O at glew.io. And I'm really excited to meet with you and help you with your business.
Awesome. And as usual, links will be in show notes. You can go to chronos.agency/podcast to get the show notes. Mark, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks for listening to the E-commerce Profits Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get notified of future episodes.